Hello and thank you for joining me today. If you enjoy long immersive history journeys like this one, feel free to follow or subscribe so you never miss our next deep exploration into the ancient world. Now, settle in, take a breath, and let us begin a long voyage into the sands of Egypt, where the pharaohs walked as living gods, and where the silence of thousands of years still holds whispers of secrets they tried very hard to hide. When we talk about Egypt, most people imagine enormous pyramids rising from the desert, glittering tombs filled with treasures, and rulers whose names echo across millennia. Yet behind the grandeur lies something far more intriguing, for the pharaohs were not simply kings with golden masks. They were the fragile anchors of a world built on cosmic order. And whenever order is threatened, secrets begin to accumulate like shadows behind a torch flame. To understand what those ancient rulers tried to conceal, we have to return to the beginning, long before the pyramids, before hieroglyphs, before the Nile Valley was even a unified land. Imagine the Nile thousands of years ago, long before the first dynasty. Its floods were wild, and its banks dotted with small communities that relied on the rhythm of nature to survive. In these early days, the people did not yet speak of pharaohs. They lived in local tribes and villages ruled by chieftains who could not command more than a few hundred people. Yet even then, there was a quiet understanding that whoever learned to control the river, or at least appeared to control it, would gain immense power. The early leaders discovered that people trusted those who promised stability in a world ruled by unpredictable waters. And in this promise lay the earliest seeds of the pharaonic secret. Authority was never just about strength. It was about illusion, ritual, and carefully crafted perception. As centuries passed, these local leaders grew more ambitious. Some claimed that they had unique relationships with the gods who governed the river. Others proclaimed that they alone understood how to predict the floods. In truth, nobody fully understood the Nile. Its floods were influenced by rains falling far beyond Egypt, in lands no Egyptian had ever seen. Yet the illusion of mastery mattered more than reality. If a leader could convince people that he held knowledge others could not access, then he could consolidate power. This early dynamic would later blossom into the divine kingship of pharaohs, who presented themselves not just as chosen by the gods, but as gods themselves. And from the very beginning, this system required secrecy. What was known could be shared, but what was mysterious could be worshipped. The unification of Egypt under the legendary Narmer or Menes, depending on which ancient source one follows, was a turning point not only politically, but also culturally. For the first time, a single figure stood above the entire Nile Valley as both ruler and symbol. The newly united kingdom needed stories to justify this unprecedented authority, stories that elevated the king beyond ordinary mortals. But with these stories came contradictions, half-truths, and political necessities that had to be managed carefully. The pharaohs could not afford to appear weak, indecisive, or threatened. And so the earliest royal scribes learned the subtle art of writing history in a way that protected the throne. This is one of the earliest categories of secrets the pharaohs guarded: the truth about their own rise to power. Battles were exaggerated, rivals were erased, and victories were polished until they gleamed like gold. If a king came to power through civil strife, this would vanish from official records. If a flood failed catastrophically during a king's early reign, leaving famine in its wake, the blame might quietly shift to a foreign threat or a misbehaving deity. The pharaoh had to embody perfection because perfection justified obedience. And so, with every new dynasty, the silence grew thicker. As the Old Kingdom emerged and the first pyramid builders began their monumental projects, secrecy became woven into the fabric of religion and statecraft. The priests, who mediated between gods and people, guarded rituals that were never meant for common eyes. The tombs of the early kings were not only burial sites, but also cosmic machines designed to ensure the pharaoh's transformation into a divine spirit. Everything was measured, aligned, and engineered with meticulous precision. Yet the purpose behind certain chambers, passages, and architectural choices was known only to a small circle of religious elites. The pyramids were intentionally cryptic, both physically and symbolically, because power thrives when knowledge is limited. As we move deeper into the Old Kingdom, the figure of Pharaoh Djoser and his vizier Imhotep emerges, and with them, the first great stone complex at Saqqara. Stories about Imhotep would later portray him as a sorcerer, a master of secret wisdom, and a bridge between mortal understanding and divine insight. Whether or not these stories reflect historical truth, they reveal something deeper. The Egyptians believed that rulers and their chosen officials possessed knowledge about the universe that they intentionally withheld from the rest of society, and the state encouraged this belief. The more inaccessible the knowledge seemed, the more sacred the king appeared. But it was during the reign of Sneferu and the subsequent rule of Khufu that the culture of concealment reached a new height. The construction of the Great Pyramid remains one of the most debated feats of human history. How exactly it was built is still not fully understood. However, the secrecy surrounding its construction was not an accident of time. Ancient Egyptians did not leave clear instructions, not because they lacked the ability to record details, but because the process of pyramid building was considered sacred state knowledge. Revealing it openly would have stripped the pharaoh of the mystique that surrounded his connection to the gods. The methods were guarded as carefully as the tomb's location and treasures. Even the workforce, often misunderstood in folk tales as slaves, consisted of skilled laborers who were organized, fed, and housed by the state. These workers were loyal, but they were also watched. Their tasks were divided in ways that limited how much any single group understood about the overall design. The intention was simple. No one outside the royal and priestly circles should possess full knowledge of the sacred architecture. In a kingdom where eternal life was the highest form of power, the secrecy of tomb design and burial rituals was paramount. Within the temples of the Old Kingdom, priests developed increasingly complex religious texts that described the journey of the pharaoh's soul after death. These texts, which included spells, instructions, and metaphysical concepts, were originally restricted only to the king. Ordinary people were not permitted to learn them. This exclusivity served a political purpose as much as a religious one. By monopolizing the secrets of the afterlife, the ruling class reinforced the idea that only the king could ensure cosmic order. Even death became a guarded privilege. As Egypt grew more prosperous, the need to defend the pharaoh's divine aura became even more urgent. Rival factions sometimes emerged within the court, and foreign threats loomed sporadically along the Nile's edges. But when instability arose, the official inscriptions rarely mentioned it. Instead, the pharaoh was always victorious, always wise, always beloved by the gods. When reality contradicted this perfect image, the contradiction was simply erased. And thus, another layer of secrecy settled across the kingdom. It is in this silence that we begin to see the outlines of deeper mysteries, the kind that would persist through every era of Egypt. What were the pharaohs truly afraid of? What knowledge did they guard so fiercely that they built entire systems around concealing it? Were these secrets religious, political, scientific, or perhaps a blend of all three? The story of those secrets and how they shaped the entire civilization stretches across thousands of years, and we have only just begun. As the Old Kingdom reached its peak, the image of the pharaoh as a flawless divine being became so deeply rooted in Egyptian life that even the smallest crack in that image had to be concealed. The power of the monarchy depended on belief, and belief depended on the careful sculpting of truth. This meant that whenever a pharaoh faced unrest, drought, rebellion, or economic strain, the scribes recorded only victories, prosperity, and cosmic harmony. What really happened behind palace walls was known only to those who witnessed it, and they were often bound by loyalty, fear, or personal interest. Thus, an entire hidden history began to grow beneath the surface of the official one. Toward the end of the Old Kingdom, this hidden history became harder to control. There were years when the Nile failed to flood adequately, and famine swept through villages along its banks. For people who believed the king was responsible for maintaining order between heaven and earth, such disasters cast doubt on the pharaoh's divine connection. Some whispered privately that perhaps the gods were displeased with the ruler, or that the priesthood had grown corrupt, or that unseen forces had disrupted the kingdom's harmony. These whispers were dangerous because they threatened the very structure of pharaonic legitimacy. The royal court worked relentlessly to quiet them, but hunger and suffering cannot easily be erased with carved declarations on temple walls. As the authority of the Old Kingdom weakened, regional governors known as nomarchs gained independence and influence. The pharaoh's power thinned, and the image of an all-powerful divine ruler became harder to maintain. The first intermediate period that followed was chaotic, marked by divisions and competing claims. Yet even in chaos, later scribes would present the pharaohs who regained power as restorers of cosmic order. The years of fragmentation themselves were never described in full detail, for doing so would expose the uncomfortable truth that the divine kingship could fail. And that was one of the greatest secrets the pharaohs needed to hide, that beneath the gold and ritual, their power was deeply vulnerable. When the Middle Kingdom emerged, the pharaohs of this era learned from the mistakes of their predecessors. They placed greater emphasis on administration, infrastructure, and the careful management of resources. But they also refined the art of secrecy. The royal family and priesthood tightened their control over sacred knowledge, rituals, and texts. While some funerary spells began to appear in the tombs of non-royal elites, the most important religious teachings remained cloaked behind layers of symbolic language and priestly interpretation. Ordinary people could never fully understand the complex cosmology that the pharaoh claimed to embody. The gap between common knowledge and royal knowledge was not accidental, it was engineered. In the Middle Kingdom, the pharaoh was presented as a shepherd of his people, a wise and just ruler whose heart beat in harmony with Ma'at, the principle of truth and universal balance. But maintaining this image required constant narrative work. Whenever the pharaoh engaged in harsh military campaigns, internal purges, or diplomatic maneuvering, the official stories shaped these actions into demonstrations of divine righteousness. Acts of political necessity were transformed into scenes of cosmic duty. This transformation was one of the kingdom's most effective tools of secrecy, the ability to change meaning without revealing motive. One fascinating dimension of this period involves the royal tombs and the growing complexity of burial magic. The afterlife was no longer seen as an exclusive royal privilege, yet the pharaoh still had to ensure that his own journey into eternity remained superior. New texts appeared, filled with elaborate spells and mystical instructions that guided the soul past guardians, demons, and cosmic obstacles. But even as these texts spread, important rituals remained restricted. The priests who performed them guarded their knowledge fiercely. Some spells were hidden inside tombs so deep and intricate that no living person was meant to see them again. These writings held descriptions of creation, destruction, protection, and transformation, ideas so powerful in Egyptian belief that exposing them risked disorder. The pharaohs wanted the people to believe in the afterlife, but not to possess the full keys to its mastery. As we move forward, a dramatic chapter of hidden truth emerges with the invasion of the Hyksos. During the Second Intermediate Period, foreign rulers gained control of the northern regions of Egypt. Their rise was gradual, facilitated not by sudden conquest, but by migration, trade, and shifting alliances. The Egyptians later portrayed the Hyksos as barbarians, invaders who stormed into the delta with violence and chaos. But archaeological evidence paints a more complex picture. The Hyksos brought innovations, technologies, and cultural influences that were later adopted by the Egyptians themselves. Their presence was not simply an invasion, but a transformation. Yet once the native Egyptian rulers of the south reclaimed the kingdom and expelled the Hyksos, The official narrative had to present the victory as a triumph of divine justice. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom depicted the Hyksos as a scourge, an unnatural intrusion into the land. To admit that the Hyksos had integrated peacefully or contributed positively would undermine the pharaoh's role as protector of purity and cosmic order. And so, once again, history was shaped, filtered, and selectively remembered. When the New Kingdom began, Egypt entered a golden age of expansion, wealth, and prestige. The pharaohs of this era, such as Ahmose, Hatshepsut, Thutmose, and Amenhotep, ruled a vast and powerful empire. But with great power came even greater need for secrecy. Diplomatic letters that survived on clay tablets reveal political deals, marriages of convenience, threats, and negotiations that the public never saw. The pharaohs had to appear unshakable, but behind palace walls, they navigated a world of fragile alliances and shifting loyalties. One of the greatest examples of royal secrecy appears in the reign of Hatshepsut, the remarkable woman who became pharaoh in a world dominated by male rulers. Her rise to the throne required delicate management of political factions and religious authorities. To legitimize her rule, she crafted a narrative that declared she had been chosen by the god Amen himself. Temples displayed carved scenes of divine prophecy, sacred conception, and heavenly approval. Yet these scenes were not records of actual events. They were part of a carefully constructed system of power. After her death, her successor attempted to erase her memory, creating one of the most dramatic acts of historical concealment in Egyptian history. Her achievements, once celebrated, were chiseled from walls and omitted from king lists, all in an effort to hide the fact that a woman had successfully ruled as pharaoh. The erasure was not out of personal hatred, but out of fear that her precedent might weaken the traditional narrative of divine kingship. Even more secretive was the reign of Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten, whose religious revolution nearly tore Egypt apart. Akhenaten's attempt to reshape Egyptian religion around the worship of the Aten disrupted centuries of tradition. For a brief period, he tried to erase the old gods, dismantle the authority of the priesthood, and present himself as the sole mediator between humanity and the divine. After his death, later rulers, including Tutankhamun, restored the old religion and attempted to erase all traces of Akhenaten's revolution. Temples dedicated to Aten were dismantled, statues were destroyed, and inscriptions were rewritten. The goal was to make it appear as though the disruption had never happened. This was secrecy on a national scale, an effort to rewrite collective memory so thoroughly that people would forget the years when Egypt's religious system nearly collapsed. Yet even with all these efforts, fragments survived. Archaeologists have uncovered broken reliefs, buried inscriptions, and abandoned city ruins that reveal the extent of the upheaval. These discoveries show us just how far the pharaohs were willing to go to hide the moments when their divine perfection wavered. After the tumult of the Amarna period, Egypt entered a phase of restoration and renewed military power. But it also entered a period where the nation outwardly maintained stability while hiding internal fractures. The late New Kingdom saw economic difficulties, corruption, strikes among tomb builders, and rising influence from foreign powers. The famous tomb robbery trials of the 20th dynasty reveal that even high officials were involved in stealing from the sacred resting places of past kings. Yet official inscriptions from this era still portrayed the pharaoh as the guardian of order. To reveal the full extent of disorder would be to admit that divine kingship was faltering. And so across every era, the pattern continued. Grandeur on the surface, secrets beneath. As the New Kingdom faded into the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt became a land of competing powers. The pharaoh's authority weakened once more, fragmenting across a mosaic of local rulers, foreign mercenaries, and priestly factions. Yet even in decline, the obsession with secrecy did not diminish. The pharaohs had long since learned that appearances were more powerful than reality. In times of instability, the control of knowledge became the most vital instrument of authority. The public continued to see images of kings performing rituals, offering gifts to gods and triumphing over enemies. But behind the scenes, the political landscape was far more complicated. The priests and officials who held ritual knowledge now wielded immense power, sometimes eclipsing the pharaoh himself. Their secrets, ceremonial, administrative, and mystical, became a currency in the struggle for dominance. One of the most fascinating aspects of this era is how the pharaohs manipulated the past to protect their present. Tomb inscriptions, temple reliefs, and monumental inscriptions were carefully curated to present a continuous line of divine rule, even when reality contradicted the story. Kings deliberately portrayed themselves as restorers of lost order, heirs to a golden age that may never have existed. They emphasized victories over enemies, divine favor, and prosperity, while silencing rebellions, famines, and failures. The very act of writing history became a tool of concealment, and scribes were trained to navigate a delicate balance between truth and the story that protected the throne. During this period, foreign relations also demanded secrecy. Egypt's borders were increasingly pressured by neighboring powers, Libyans, Nubians, and Assyrians among them. The pharaohs maintained the illusion of invincibility through diplomacy, propaganda, and strategic marriages, but the true state of military strength and economic resources was rarely visible to the public. Treaties and alliances were often secret, as revealing weakness could invite invasion. And yet, the official narrative presented Egypt as eternally secure, divinely protected, and politically unshakable. The late period of Egypt, spanning roughly from the 7th to the 4th centuries BCE, is particularly rich in examples of concealed truths. During this time, pharaohs ruled under the shadow of external domination. Assyrians, Persians, and later Macedonians exerted influence or control over Egyptian lands. The pharaohs of this period faced the daunting task of maintaining the illusion of sovereignty while negotiating survival under foreign oversight. Temple inscriptions continued to depict the pharaoh as the victorious champion of man, but these images were carefully crafted to obscure the compromises and subjugation taking place behind the palace walls. This era demonstrates how secrecy evolved from the concealment of individual failures into the concealment of an entire nation's vulnerability. Religious secrecy, too, reached new heights. Temples increasingly became centers of concentrated knowledge, where only high-ranking priests could access sacred texts and perform rituals. While the public could participate in festivals, observe ceremonies, and make offerings, the true mechanisms of divine power were restricted. The pharaoh's connection to the gods was portrayed as absolute, yet the specifics of that connection were closely guarded. Some rituals involved symbolic gestures whose meaning was understood only by initiates. Others required precise recitations from scrolls that were forbidden to common eyes. In this way, knowledge itself became a fortress. The pharaoh and priesthood controlled not only the present, but also the spiritual narrative of the afterlife. Even burial practices concealed profound secrets. Tombs were designed not only to preserve the body, but to guide the soul through an unseen and treacherous landscape. Hidden chambers, false passages, and symbolic art served both as spiritual protections and practical safeguards against tomb robbers. The pharaoh's burial rituals were deeply encoded. Spells inscribed on walls were intended to activate cosmic forces, but their true power remained a secret accessible only to those trained in the mysteries. Ordinary observers might see only gold, stone, and art, unaware that the tomb itself functioned as a sophisticated spiritual machine. The secrecy of death, paradoxically, ensured the continuity of life and power. The Ptolemaic period, following Alexander the Great's conquest, introduced another layer of secrecy. The pharaohs of this era, ruling as Greek-Egyptian hybrids, continued ancient traditions while also adapting to a new cosmopolitan reality. They maintained the outward appearance of the traditional Egyptian pharaoh, complete with royal titulary, temple ceremonies, and divine associations. Yet the reality of governance had shifted. Power was increasingly exercised through a bureaucratic Greek elite, while the Egyptian priesthood still held control over religious knowledge. The Ptolemies concealed this duality carefully. Inscriptions, temple reliefs, and public rituals all emphasized continuity with the sacred traditions of the past, masking the significant transformations that had occurred beneath the surface. Throughout all these periods, the pharaohs' secrets were not limited to politics or religion. There is evidence that they guarded knowledge of medicine, chemistry, and metallurgy. Certain recipes for embalming, preparation of sacred oils, and construction materials were restricted to specific temple workshops. Knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture was closely tied to sacred and political authority. The pharaohs understood that mastery of the natural and cosmic world reinforced their claim to divine power. Revealing too much of this knowledge could diminish the awe and obedience that sustained their rule. In this sense, secrecy was both a shield and a tool, a way to maintain power, protect the kingdom, and manipulate perception. Even ordinary life was affected by the culture of concealment. Markets, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers operated within the boundaries of a world carefully framed by authority. Religious festivals and public rituals were structured to present a cohesive vision of cosmic order, while hiding the complexities, inefficiencies, and conflicts that defined real society. To the average citizen, the pharaoh appeared infallible, the gods omnipotent, and the afterlife guaranteed. But in truth, the machinery of empire required constant negotiation, adaptation, and concealment. The secrecy of the pharaohs was not a single act or policy. It was a continuous, evolving strategy that shaped every aspect of life in Egypt. As we approach the final chapters of Egypt's long history, it becomes clear that the most enduring secret of the pharaohs was the nature of their power itself. It was never simply political or military. It was symbolic, ritual, and psychological. The pharaohs ruled not only through armies and bureaucracy, but through an elaborate system of controlled perception, restricted knowledge, and cosmic narrative. Every monument, text, and ritual was part of this vast architecture of secrecy. And when the civilization eventually fell under the weight of foreign conquest, much of this hidden world was buried, some lost, some surviving in fragments that tantalize modern scholars and archaeologists. The pharaohs tried to hide not just mistakes, failures, or human frailties, but the mechanisms of life, death, and divine authority itself. They attempted to conceal the fragility beneath the grandeur, the vulnerability beneath the gold, and the human decisions behind the godlike facade. And even today, we continue to uncover these secrets, piece by piece, tomb by tomb, scroll by scroll, trying to reconstruct a world that was carefully designed to remain partially hidden. The story of what the pharaohs tried to hide is far from complete. Each excavation, each new discovery, reveals not only ancient knowledge, but also the lengths to which humans will go to protect power, perception, and belief. It is a story of ambition, faith, deception, and mystery, stretching across millennia and leaving echoes that continue to fascinate us today. As the centuries progressed, Egypt became increasingly entangled with foreign powers. The pharaohs of the late period and Ptolemaic era ruled a kingdom that was at once ancient and vulnerable. Their power relied not only on traditional authority, but also on the careful management of perception, religious symbolism, and secret knowledge. The priests, temple administrators, and scribes became the true keepers of these secrets. Some temples held libraries of texts that included everything from sacred hymns to sophisticated astronomical observations, the knowledge of which could influence ritual timing, agricultural planning, or even political decisions. Access to such texts was restricted to a very small inner circle. Revealing them could disrupt both the economy and the authority of the pharaoh. One of the most fascinating aspects of late Egyptian secrecy involves the temples themselves. Massive complexes like Karnak and Luxor were not merely places of worship. They were repositories of knowledge, archives of history, and instruments of political power. Hidden rooms, concealed chambers, and coded inscriptions ensured that only those initiated into temple hierarchies could interpret the true meaning of their architecture and art. Rituals performed in these spaces were often staged to impress the public, while concealing the deeper cosmological truths known only to the priesthood. Some of these rituals involved complex interactions with water, light, and sound, orchestrated to reinforce the illusion of divine presence. The pharaoh was always at the center of these performances, not because he necessarily understood all the mysteries himself, but because his image as divine mediator amplified the authority of the ritual. The late pharaohs also maintained secrecy through burial practices that were more elaborate than ever. Tombs were designed to hide both treasures and esoteric knowledge. False doors, hidden chambers, and elaborate mazes were created not only to protect the physical remains, but also to obscure the symbolic meaning of death and rebirth encoded in the tomb's design. Some passages in tombs contain inscriptions that only make sense when read in sequence with other tombs or temples, creating a network of hidden knowledge that was accessible only to an elite few. These measures reflect the pharaoh's enduring fear that if the knowledge of divine kingship, of the cosmic order they claimed to maintain, were fully understood or misused, their authority could be undermined. Even in daily governance, secrecy played a pivotal role. Administrative documents, tax records, and military plans were often encrypted in ways we are only beginning to decipher. Pharaohs controlled the flow of information as carefully as they controlled the flow of the Nile. Local officials might record their work in detailed scrolls, but access to these scrolls was strictly limited, and much of what was recorded was intentionally obscured or sanitized before it reached the central authorities. The message sent to the people was always consistent. The pharaoh was all-knowing, just, and divinely sanctioned. The reality, however, often involved negotiation, compromise, and manipulation behind the scenes. Some of the most compelling secrets involve the pharaohs' interactions with mystical practices. While ordinary Egyptians could perform household rituals and offerings, certain rites, especially those connected to royal authority or the afterlife, were strictly reserved for the king and high priests. These rites included complex sequences intended to ensure the pharaoh's spiritual protection, influence the natural world, and maintain the cosmic balance of man. The knowledge embedded in these practices was not simply religious but also practical, affecting agriculture, medicine, and the organization of labor. By restricting this knowledge, the pharaohs preserved both their spiritual and temporal authority. During the Ptolemaic period, secrecy took on a new dimension. The blending of Greek and Egyptian cultures created a dual system of rule where the pharaoh was at once a traditional Egyptian god-king and a Hellenistic monarch operating within a bureaucratic state. Many of the old Egyptian secrets were preserved, but they were layered beneath Greek administrative systems, foreign rituals, and political alliances. Temples continued to guard sacred texts and ritual knowledge, yet the pharaoh's power increasingly relied on the perception of stability and divine favor rather than direct control of every temple and province. The secrets became subtler, more symbolic, and yet no less vital for maintaining authority. Even as Egypt fell under Roman influence, the legacy of pharaonic secrecy persisted. Knowledge of rituals, tombs, and sacred architecture was carefully guarded by priests who continued to perform ceremonies in secret. The idea that the pharaoh's power derived from access to hidden knowledge endured, influencing local rulers and religious authorities long after the last native dynasties faded. The treasures of tombs, the meaning of inscriptions, and the techniques of monumental construction continued to hold mystical and political significance, even when the original structures of authority were gone. In examining these centuries, a pattern emerges. The pharaohs did not hide secrets merely to protect wealth or power. They concealed them to shape reality itself. By controlling knowledge, they controlled perception, belief, and behavior. Secrets operated on multiple levels: political, religious, technological, and psychological. A failure to conceal could invite rebellion, spiritual disorder, or social collapse. The very survival of the pharaoh's image depended on secrecy. Every monument, tomb, ritual, and inscription was a tool of both revelation and concealment, designed to make the pharaoh appear eternal, omnipotent, and invulnerable, while keeping the messy realities of governance hidden from view. The final secret of the pharaohs may be the most profound of all, their understanding that history itself could be manipulated. By controlling what was recorded, remembered, and celebrated, they shaped the collective memory of their civilization. Wars could be erased, achievements exaggerated, failures concealed, and dynasties reconstructed in narrative form. Some of the most extraordinary discoveries in modern Egyptology involve uncovering these hidden layers, erased names, overlaid inscriptions, and clandestine burial chambers that reveal stories long thought lost. Each discovery is a glimpse behind the curtain, a rare view into the intricate strategies of concealment that sustained pharaonic power for millennia. The secrets of the pharaohs, then, were never just about hiding wealth, knowledge, or mistakes. They were about controlling the perception of reality itself. From the first unification of the Nile Valley to the final Ptolemaic rulers, Egypt was shaped as much by what was hidden as by what was visible. The pharaohs understood that power is not simply exercised. It is imagined, performed, and believed in. And the most enduring mysteries of Egypt, its tombs, temples, and texts, are the physical embodiment of that understanding, testifying to a civilization that mastered the art of secrecy in order to preserve the illusion of eternity. From the earliest pyramids to the grand tombs of the Valley of the Kings, the burial practices of the pharaohs were designed to hide more than just their mortal remains. They concealed profound knowledge about the cosmos, the soul, and the interplay between life and death. In the Old and Middle Kingdoms, the tomb was not simply a resting place. It was a portal, a carefully engineered machine to ensure the pharaoh's safe passage into eternity. The location of the tomb itself was often secret, chosen not merely for convenience or grandeur, but for its symbolic alignment with celestial patterns. The Nile, the stars, the solstices, and even the landscape's subtle contours were incorporated into these designs. Only the priests and the pharaoh's closest officials understood these alignments, ensuring that the full power of the tomb remained inaccessible to outsiders. Inside the tomb, concealment became multi-layered. The sarcophagus, often hidden behind false walls or sealed chambers, was itself a symbol of hidden knowledge. Inscriptions on the walls were not merely decorative. They were spells, instructions, and metaphysical diagrams meant to guide the soul past dangers in the afterlife. But these inscriptions were intentionally cryptic. The full meaning could be interpreted only by those trained in the sacred mysteries. Hieroglyphs, while visually legible, often carried multiple layers of symbolic meaning. A phrase that appeared to describe a journey might simultaneously encode astronomical, mathematical, or ritual instructions. These layers ensured that the tombs preserved both material treasures and spiritual wisdom for eternity, while keeping most of it hidden from those uninitiated. The process of mummification itself was another tightly guarded secret. The methods used to preserve bodies were extraordinarily advanced for their time, involving precise chemical processes, removal of organs, and careful wrapping techniques that ensured longevity. While some knowledge of these techniques eventually spread, the most important formulas, particularly those used for royal mummies, remained confidential. Priests of specialized workshops were the only ones who knew the full recipes for resins, oils, and embalming methods. Mistakes could imperil the pharaoh's afterlife, so secrecy was absolute. Even minor breaches of this knowledge were severely punished, reflecting the belief that spiritual as well as temporal authority depended on the successful concealment of these techniques. Lost texts form another layer of the pharaoh's hidden knowledge. Many writings, now fragmented or destroyed, were designed to remain inaccessible, either physically buried in hidden chambers or encoded in language that required advanced training to decipher. Some texts contained spells, hymns, and incantations meant only for the pharaoh or the highest priests. Others were guides to navigating the afterlife, containing descriptions of guardians, obstacles, and cosmic forces that awaited the soul. These texts were often duplicated with variations, scattered across different tombs or temples to ensure redundancy, but the knowledge they contained was always restricted. To access the complete body of wisdom required both initiation and authority, a combination possessed only by the ruler and his most trusted religious advisors. Forbidden rituals, the most enigmatic aspect of pharaonic secrecy, were performed to manipulate forces beyond ordinary perception. These rituals ranged from invoking protection over the kingdom to controlling elements of nature and cosmic cycles. Some involved complex sequences of movement, speech, and symbolic offerings, enacted in precisely timed astronomical windows. Others were conducted in hidden chambers or isolated sanctuaries, entirely removed from public view. The efficacy of these rituals depended on secrecy. Revealing them could diminish their power or even unleash unintended consequences. These practices reflect the profound understanding the pharaohs had of both human psychology and the symbolic universe. They recognized that belief, fear, and awe were as potent as armies or wealth in maintaining authority. The Valley of the Kings exemplifies this philosophy of concealment. Tombs were carved deep into cliffs, with passages designed to confuse intruders. Some chambers were deliberately constructed to appear accessible while hiding the true burial site. Others contained hidden compartments to protect sacred objects or writings. Despite the best efforts of robbers, many tombs survived centuries because their secrets were multi-layered and intentionally obscure. The very architecture of these tombs speaks to a culture obsessed with the protection of knowledge, treasure, and the pharaoh's divine essence. Even the depiction of daily life, rituals, and victories in tomb art was carefully curated to conceal inconvenient truths. Scenes of feasting, triumph in battle, or pious devotion to the gods were often idealized or symbolic rather than literal. Events that might reveal political weakness, military failure, or personal vulnerability were omitted entirely. In this way, the tomb served not only as a spiritual safeguard, but also as a curated historical record, a record designed to communicate an image of perfection, divine favor, and eternal authority to future generations. Magical knowledge and sacred geometry were other areas where secrecy prevailed. The pharaohs, architects, priests, and artisans were trained in principles of proportion, alignment, and symbolism that went beyond mere engineering. Measurements were often encoded with astronomical, cosmological, and mystical significance. Temples and pyramids were aligned to stars, solstices, and celestial events, creating a direct, symbolic link between the pharaoh and the cosmos. Only those initiated into the sacred sciences could fully grasp these connections. To the public, these structures appeared monumental and awe-inspiring, but the deeper understanding, the invisible hand guiding their creation, remained hidden. Even the pharaohs' personal lives were shrouded in secrecy. Political marriages, succession plans, and internal rivalries were carefully concealed to prevent unrest. Court intrigue, assassinations, and betrayals were either erased from records or presented in ways that reinforced the king's image of divine authority. Some pharaohs, like Hatshepsut, attempted to rewrite history entirely to legitimize their rule, while others, like Akhenaten, attempted radical religious reform and then were erased from official memory after their deaths. These efforts show that secrecy was not only a matter of protection, but also a form of power itself, the ability to shape reality by controlling what was remembered and what was forgotten. Even as Egypt entered the Hellenistic and Roman periods, the cultural legacy of secrecy persisted. Temples continued to guard rituals and sacred texts, while the notion of the pharaoh, or its symbolic successor, remained intertwined with divine mystery. Certain initiatory rites, mystical teachings, and magical practices continued in private, ensuring that the ancient knowledge of the pharaohs survived even as political power shifted to foreign hands. The ultimate secret, then, was not a single object or text, but the enduring method of concealing knowledge itself, a strategy that allowed the pharaohs to maintain authority across millennia and leave a legacy of awe, mystery, and hidden wisdom that continues to captivate us today. The deepest of the pharaohs' secrets lies in their conception of divine kingship itself, a complex system of ritual, symbolism, and spiritual authority designed to maintain the illusion of eternal power. The pharaoh was not merely a political ruler. He was considered the living embodiment of the gods on earth, a mediator between the mortal and the cosmic, the visible and the invisible. This status was not simply proclaimed. It was cultivated through an intricate network of rituals, symbols, and carefully guarded knowledge. From the very moment a pharaoh ascended to the throne, he entered a world of ceremonial codes, initiatory rites, and hidden practices that few, if any, outsiders could fully comprehend. Even among the highest priests, understanding was often compartmentalized, creating a layered system of secrecy that reinforced both spiritual authority and temporal power. One of the most enigmatic aspects of these hidden practices involved the pharaoh's personal initiation into the mysteries of kingship. While details remain obscure, records and archaeological evidence suggest that young kings underwent prolonged periods of instruction in sacred temples, learning to perform rites that were designed to align their own bodies and consciousness with the divine order. They were taught to read hieroglyphic texts with multiple layers of meaning, to interpret celestial movements, and to conduct rituals that could influence both natural and spiritual realms. Some of these rites involved the use of sacred objects, amulets, or ceremonial clothing imbued with symbolic power. Others required precise recitations of spells, gestures, and prayers designed to activate unseen forces. The initiation was not merely symbolic. The pharaohs believed that mastery of these rituals had tangible effects on the kingdom's prosperity, the Nile's inundation, and the stability of the cosmic order. The burial rituals of the pharaohs represent another layer of profound secrecy. Beyond the construction of monumental tombs, the preparation of the body, the selection of grave goods, and the inscriptions on the walls of the tombs were all imbued with hidden significance. Tombs were not simply repositories for material wealth, but carefully orchestrated machines of spiritual transformation. The layout of chambers, the orientation of passages, and the placement of sacred objects were aligned with celestial patterns, designed to guide the soul safely through the afterlife. Certain chambers and passages were intentionally concealed, containing inscriptions and artifacts that were never intended to be seen by anyone other than those initiated into the highest mysteries. These hidden spaces often contain texts or objects whose precise purpose is still debated by modern scholars, suggesting that even today, we glimpse only a fraction of the knowledge the pharaohs sought to protect. Among these hidden objects were the sacred amulets, ceremonial tools, and ritual instruments that formed the pharaoh's personal arsenal of divine power. Some amulets contained spells intended to protect the soul. Others encoded cosmological knowledge or formulas for maintaining mad, the principle of cosmic balance. Scepters, crowns, and ceremonial knives were not merely symbols of authority, but functional tools in the pharaoh's sacred duties. Many were inscribed with coded texts or subtle symbolic patterns, accessible only to those trained in the rituals of the court. The secrecy surrounding these objects was absolute. Possession, knowledge of their use, or exposure of their secrets to outsiders could have catastrophic spiritual and political consequences according to the beliefs of the time. The pharaohs also relied on the secrecy of knowledge related to astronomy and timekeeping. Celestial cycles were of vital importance to Egypt's agriculture, religious festivals, and ritual calendar. Temples, tombs, and monuments were frequently aligned with solstices, equinoxes, or particular stars, creating a direct connection between the pharaoh, the gods, and the natural rhythms of the cosmos. However, the methods used to calculate these alignments and the full significance of the celestial patterns were guarded secrets. Knowledge of the stars was not freely shared because it underpinned the pharaoh's claim to divine authority. If ordinary people could predict celestial events as accurately as the king, the mystical aura of kingship would diminish. This intertwining of scientific observation, ritual practice, and political power demonstrates how secrecy extended far beyond religion or politics. It encompassed the very understanding of the natural world. The pharaohs also mastered the concealment of political and historical knowledge. Their inscriptions, reliefs, and monuments were meticulously curated to present a continuous narrative of divine authority and unbroken order. Wars, rebellions, failed campaigns, and internal disputes were either omitted or reframed as acts of cosmic justice or moral necessity. Rival dynasties were erased from official records. Names were chiseled from temple walls. Victories were exaggerated. Even the memory of extraordinary rulers could be altered or suppressed to maintain the illusion of stability. Hatshepsut, whose reign as a female pharaoh was almost erased from history, and Akhenaten, whose religious revolution was largely obliterated, are perhaps the most famous examples of the lengths to which the pharaohs, or their successors, went to control collective memory. In each case, the erasure was itself a form of secrecy, a deliberate act designed to manipulate perception across generations. Some of the most tantalizing mysteries involve artifacts and writings that may never have been intended for discovery. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of texts and objects whose purpose remains opaque, scrolls buried in hidden chambers, objects with inscriptions that do not match any known language, and symbols whose meaning may be forever lost. The pharaohs deliberately created such items to protect the most dangerous or powerful knowledge, ensuring that only the initiated could wield or interpret it. These artifacts suggest a culture in which concealment was not incidental but central. Power was derived not only from wealth or armies, but from the careful control of information, ritual, and perception. Secrecy also extended into the interaction between humans and the divine. Certain rituals, particularly those conducted in hidden temple chambers or sanctuaries, were believed to influence the forces of nature, the flow of the Nile, or even the fate of neighboring kingdoms. Access to these rituals was strictly limited, and the instructions were encoded in ways that ensured only the pharaoh and trusted priests could perform them correctly. Failure or exposure could threaten both spiritual and temporal stability, illustrating the profound interconnection between secrecy, governance, and religion. Even as foreign powers, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and eventually Romans, interacted with Egypt, the pharaohs' secrets persisted. Many temple traditions continued in private, and certain ritual knowledge was transmitted clandestinely to preserve continuity with the past. The symbolic authority of the pharaoh, even under foreign domination, remained tied to access to hidden knowledge, secret rituals, and esoteric objects. The civilization itself was built upon this layered system. Monuments, texts, artifacts, and rituals formed a protective lattice, designed to conceal, encode, and preserve both divine and earthly authority. The pharaoh's secrets were not static. They evolved over millennia. They adapted to changing political circumstances, foreign influences, and internal challenges, yet their fundamental purpose remained the same: to maintain the illusion of divine and unbroken authority. The concealment of knowledge, whether through hidden tombs, coded inscriptions, or secret rituals, allowed the pharaohs to exercise power across generations, shaping a civilization that appeared eternal and omnipotent even as it faced constant threats, failures, and upheavals. The secret networks of the priesthood were among the most critical tools the pharaohs had at their disposal. Priests were not merely religious functionaries. They were the keepers of knowledge, guardians of sacred texts, and intermediaries between the pharaoh and the gods. Their access to rituals, astronomical calculations, and sacred inscriptions gave them immense influence, but this influence was carefully balanced against the authority of the pharaoh himself. Knowledge was compartmentalized. One priest might understand the mysteries of celestial alignments, another might be entrusted with the maintenance of sacred artifacts, and yet another might oversee funerary rituals or protective spells. No single individual possessed complete access, creating a system in which the pharaoh remained the central authority precisely because he alone could coordinate these specialized spheres of secrecy. This compartmentalization extended to the training of scribes as well. Scribes were far more than clerks. They were intellectual guardians, trained from a young age to memorize, copy, and interpret texts whose meaning was often multi-layered. Their work was essential for preserving the pharaoh's image, ensuring continuity in rituals, and maintaining records of astronomical, administrative, and military knowledge. Yet even scribes were restricted in what they could access. Certain religious texts, magical formulas, and ritual instructions were withheld until they reached a sufficient level of initiation. In this way, secrecy became institutionalized. Knowledge itself was hierarchically distributed, ensuring that the pharaoh could remain the ultimate arbiter of truth and divine authority. The pharaoh's control of perception extended beyond temple walls and tombs. Public ceremonies, festivals, and state rituals were meticulously orchestrated to create a sense of cosmic order, stability, and divine sanction. The Apit festival, the Est festival, and numerous other celebrations were not merely for devotion. They were spectacles of authority designed to reinforce the pharaoh's power in the minds of the people. During these events, the pharaoh appeared as the living embodiment of the gods, participating in symbolic acts that both reassured the population and concealed the political or economic realities of the time. The underlying rituals, the precise timings, and the sacred meanings were known only to the initiated priests, creating a dual reality: the visible, public display and the hidden, esoteric truth accessible only to the elite. Secret knowledge also permeated the construction of monumental architecture. Pyramids, temples, obelisks, and mortuary complexes were not simply built for durability or aesthetic grandeur. They encoded knowledge about mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and the spiritual order. Alignments with the stars, solstices, and cardinal directions were deliberate, serving both symbolic and practical functions. Some temples incorporated hidden chambers and concealed passageways aligned with solar or lunar phenomena, allowing sunlight or shadow to illuminate sacred inscriptions at specific times of the year. These secret interactions of light, space, and sacred architecture were designed to demonstrate the pharaoh's divine favor, while also embedding ritual knowledge into the very stones of the kingdom. Ordinary observers might see monumental beauty, but the deeper, precise functions of these constructions remained hidden. Artifacts, too, were carefully designed to conceal their full purpose. Statues, jewelry, ceremonial vessels, and even mundane objects could contain coded inscriptions or symbolic designs that held ritual significance. Some amulets were functional, intended to channel protective energy. Others encoded numerical, astronomical, or magical knowledge. The same principle applied to ritual objects like scepters, wands, and ceremonial blades, which were used in rites that combined spiritual intention with precise physical and symbolic actions. These objects were often layered in meaning. Their outward appearance reflected status, religious significance, or artistry, while their inner purpose was encoded in symbolism comprehensible only to trained priests or the pharaoh himself. Even the art within tombs and temples served multiple levels of secrecy. Scenes of gods, pharaohs, and rituals were never purely decorative. A single depiction could simultaneously communicate theological principles, political allegory, and cosmic knowledge. Hieroglyphic inscriptions frequently included hidden messages, double meanings, or references to celestial or mathematical systems. Some texts were deliberately ambiguous, designed to conceal their true meaning from uninitiated readers while conveying precise instructions to those trained in the sacred mysteries. This layering of meaning created a civilization in which knowledge existed everywhere yet remained largely inaccessible, a system in which power was maintained through selective revelation. The Pharaohs' burial practices represent perhaps the most dramatic example of secrecy in action. Tombs were constructed with hidden chambers, false doors, and labyrinthine passageways. The placement of funerary goods, the arrangement of coffins, and even the orientation of rooms were aligned with cosmic and spiritual principles. Certain chambers contained instructions for the afterlife that were encoded in hieroglyphs, symbolic art, or numerological patterns. Some passages were deliberately hidden or obstructed to prevent intrusion, ensuring that the most sacred knowledge, the formulas for eternal life, the protection of the soul, and the precise rituals for navigating the afterworld remained secure. The hidden tombs, particularly in the Valley of the Kings, were designed not merely to protect wealth, but to safeguard spiritual and esoteric knowledge that could empower or threaten both the living and the dead. Coded inscriptions were another hallmark of pharaonic secrecy. Beyond the symbolic ambiguity of hieroglyphs, some texts incorporated numeric codes, mirrored or inverted hieroglyphs, and layers of meaning that could only be deciphered through initiation and training. Certain rituals required precise recitations of these encoded texts, which were thought to activate cosmic forces, channel divine energy, or protect the pharaoh's soul. Access to these texts was tightly controlled. Mistakes in interpretation or misuse could imperil the kingdom's spiritual balance or even the pharaoh's own divine authority. Secrecy extended into esoteric knowledge about natural forces. The pharaohs, in coordination with priestly scholars, understood the cycles of the Nile, the patterns of the stars, and the timing of agricultural and ritual events. This knowledge was deliberately withheld from the general population, creating a perception that the pharaoh alone controlled these forces by divine mandate. Such control reinforced both practical governance and spiritual authority, demonstrating that secrecy was not simply a tool of deception, but a functional mechanism for managing the kingdom itself. Even within the pharaoh's personal life, secrecy was paramount. Succession plans, political alliances, and court intrigues were carefully concealed. Hatshepsut's erasure from history, Akhenaten's obliteration after his religious reforms, and the hidden machinations of other rulers illustrate a culture in which knowledge itself was power. The public perception of unbroken divine authority was maintained through deliberate manipulation, while the true dynamics of power, succession, and ritual remained closely guarded. The pharaohs also understood that secrecy was generational. Sacred texts, ritual knowledge, and architectural principles were transmitted selectively, ensuring continuity across centuries. Apprenticeship, initiation, and hierarchical control of knowledge created a lineage of secret keepers who could maintain the pharaoh's authority even as the kingdom faced internal or external challenges. This method of knowledge preservation allowed the civilization to endure, creating the illusion of timeless stability even as reality was constantly negotiated behind closed doors. Among the most profound and least understood aspects of ancient Egyptian power were the magical practices that the pharaohs and their inner circles guarded zealously. Magic in Egypt, often referred to as Heka, was not merely superstition. It was considered an essential force that underpinned reality itself. Heka was thought to bridge the human and divine, the living and the dead, the visible and the unseen. The pharaoh, as the living embodiment of divinity, was uniquely positioned to harness this force, but only through knowledge that was carefully protected. Certain spells, rituals, and incantations were reserved for the king and a select group of high priests, while the common people could participate only in simplified versions or public festivals that conveyed symbolic power without revealing the deeper mechanisms. These magical practices were intertwined with political control. The pharaoh's ability to command the gods and direct cosmic forces reinforced his legitimacy. Public ceremonies displayed this control dramatically. The inundation of the Nile, agricultural prosperity, and victories in war were framed as evidence of divine favor. But behind the spectacle, elaborate magical rituals ensured that outcomes remained aligned with political and religious objectives. Priests acted as intermediaries, performing rites that channeled sacred energy, protected the pharaoh, and safeguarded the kingdom. The secrecy surrounding these practices ensured that ordinary Egyptians attributed all success to divine favor, rather than to human manipulation or ritual expertise. Secret cults provided another layer of hidden authority. Some cults were openly associated with major deities like Amun, Osiris, or Ra, but others operated in near-total secrecy. These cults often focused on esoteric aspects of the divine, the afterlife, or the pharaoh's role as intermediary. Initiates underwent rigorous instruction, learning hidden rituals, memorizing sacred texts, and gaining access to secret chambers or archives. Certain cults were directly responsible for maintaining sacred artifacts or ritual sites, guarding knowledge that could destabilize authority if exposed. Membership was highly selective, often restricted to members of the royal family, high-ranking priests, or trusted officials. Through these cults, the pharaoh exercised influence over both spiritual and practical realms, ensuring that control over hidden knowledge remained centralized. Artifacts associated with these cults often carried multiple layers of meaning. Amulets, statues, ceremonial knives, and ritual vessels were imbued with both symbolic and functional power. An amulet might provide protection, encode cosmological knowledge, or contain a concealed spell that only the initiated could activate. Ritual knives and scepters were not merely ceremonial. They were instruments through which the pharaoh or priests could manipulate unseen forces. Even mundane-seeming objects could serve as vessels for hidden knowledge, linking physical action to spiritual outcome. Many of these artifacts were deliberately hidden, buried in secret caches, or encoded with inscriptions that required precise understanding to interpret. The concealment of these objects ensured that their power remained in the hands of the authorized few. The pharaohs also understood the power of fear as a tool of secrecy. Curses, for instance, were a deliberate means of deterring intrusion into tombs, temples, and sacred spaces. Inscriptions warning of divine retribution or spiritual harm served a practical purpose. They protected material wealth and esoteric knowledge by instilling dread in potential thieves or unauthorized visitors. But the use of fear went beyond physical protection. The threat of supernatural punishment reinforced the perception of the pharaoh as a figure whose authority extended into both the mortal and divine realms. Even those who did not fully understand the rituals or texts internalized a sense of order, awe, and obedience, further consolidating power through secrecy. The manipulation of awe, too, was central to pharaonic secrecy. Monumental architecture, grandiose public ceremonies, and intricate symbolic art created an overwhelming sense of scale and divine presence. The size of the pyramids, the grandeur of temples like Karnak and Luxor, and the detailed carvings depicting gods, kings, and cosmic order were designed to impress, to inspire belief, and to obscure the underlying human organization that made them possible. Ordinary Egyptians saw perfection, eternity, and divine favor, but few understood the complex labor systems, political negotiations, and esoteric knowledge that made these spectacles possible. In this sense, awe was a form of concealment. It distracted attention from the practical realities while simultaneously reinforcing the perception of divine authority. Secretive burial practices continued to evolve as well. The pharaoh's tomb was a microcosm of hidden knowledge. Chambers were designed with astronomical alignment in mind. Passages incorporated coded inscriptions, and artifacts contained symbolic, magical, and practical instructions for the afterlife. Some tombs included chambers that were intentionally hidden or blocked, containing knowledge or items not meant to be disturbed by robbers or even by later rulers. The Valley of the Kings, with its complex network of tombs, false doors, and concealed chambers, exemplifies this practice. Here, the pharaoh's death became both a practical concern for the living and a cosmic event, a controlled intersection of secrecy, ritual, and eternal power. Lost or partially destroyed texts represent another enduring mystery. Many sacred writings, spellbooks, and ritual manuals were deliberately concealed, scattered, or erased. Some were copied onto perishable materials like papyrus, ensuring that only fragments would survive over time. Others were inscribed in hidden chambers, deliberately encoded in multiple layers of meaning. These texts likely contained instructions for rituals, magical practices, and political strategies that were never intended for the uninitiated. Their concealment was not accidental. It was a deliberate method to centralize authority, preserve esoteric knowledge, and maintain the perception of the pharaoh's invincibility. Even the ordinary administrative and military records were shaped by secrecy. Chronicles of campaigns, tax records, and governance documents were curated, edited, or encoded to present the pharaoh in the most favorable light. Victories were emphasized, defeats minimized, and internal dissent often omitted entirely. Political strategy was sometimes embedded in allegorical inscriptions on monuments or hidden within coded texts. The control of information, therefore, was inseparable from the control of the kingdom itself. By regulating knowledge, the pharaoh and his inner circle shaped perception and manipulated reality to sustain authority. Secrecy was also a temporal strategy. Knowledge of rituals, sacred objects, and esoteric texts was transmitted across generations selectively. Apprenticeship, initiation, and hierarchical distribution of knowledge ensured continuity while preventing unauthorized access. The pharaohs understood that the longevity of their power depended on the preservation of secrecy, not merely in their own lifetimes but across centuries. Even as dynasties rose and fell, the fundamental structure of concealed authority persisted, creating the illusion of uninterrupted, divine kingship. The pharaoh's secrets, therefore, were multifaceted: magical, architectural, ritualistic, symbolic, political, and even psychological. Their civilization was a vast network of concealed knowledge, deliberately engineered to maintain both awe and obedience. Every artifact, monument, ritual, and inscription served dual purposes: to communicate and to conceal. To the modern observer, these layers of secrecy create a tantalizing puzzle, one that archaeologists and historians are still deciphering, uncovering fragment by fragment, secret by secret. One of the most fascinating aspects of pharaonic secrecy is the integration of mathematics into both spiritual and temporal governance. The Egyptians did not treat mathematics as a purely abstract discipline. It was a sacred tool, a language through which the cosmos could be interpreted and manipulated. Sacred geometry underpinned the construction of pyramids, temples, and tombs, with proportions carefully aligned to celestial and terrestrial phenomena. The dimensions of pyramids, for instance, were not chosen arbitrarily. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points, its sides proportional in ways that reflect knowledge of pi long before the formal concept existed in other civilizations. Scholars have debated for centuries how the pharaohs and their architects achieved such precision, but what is clear is that these measurements were not merely practical. They were symbolic, ritualistic, and secret. The pharaohs, architects, and priests understood that by embedding mathematical harmony into sacred structures, they were connecting the king, the state, and the divine order itself. Astronomical knowledge was another key component of hidden power. Temples, tombs, and monuments were aligned with stars, planets, solstices, and equinoxes in ways that ordinary observers would not perceive. Certain rituals relied on the movement of celestial bodies, using light and shadow to activate sacred inscriptions or illuminate statues at precise moments. For example, the Temple of Abu Simbel was designed so that twice a year, the sun would penetrate its inner sanctuary to illuminate the statues of gods and the pharaoh himself. a cosmic performance meant to demonstrate divine favor. These alignments were carefully calculated and kept secret. They allowed the pharaoh to claim authority over cosmic cycles, linking human governance with the movements of the heavens. The general population witnessed the spectacle, but could not understand the science or mathematics behind it, reinforcing the perception of the pharaoh as a divine intermediary. Many ritual objects were similarly encoded with secret knowledge. Ceremonial staffs, scepters, knives, and even mundane-looking vessels contained inscriptions and symbols whose full meaning was accessible only to the initiated. Some artifacts were designed to manipulate spiritual forces. Others encoded astronomical, mathematical, or ritual instructions. Many objects were deliberately hidden or buried in secret caches within temples and tombs, creating layers of security that protected both the material and metaphysical power they contained. Certain amulets, for instance, were inscribed with magical formulas that could protect the pharaoh in life and death, but their use required precise understanding and execution, accessible only to the elite priests and the king himself. The pharaohs also employed cryptography of sorts in their inscriptions. Hieroglyphs could convey multiple layers of meaning simultaneously, incorporating symbolic, mathematical, and phonetic codes. Some texts used inversion, mirror writing, or unusual sequencing to obscure the true purpose of a ritual or spell. Coded inscriptions were particularly prevalent in tombs, where they served to guide the pharaoh's soul through the afterlife, while simultaneously concealing the sacred knowledge from tomb robbers or uninitiated priests. Certain tombs, such as those in the Valley of the Kings, contain inscriptions whose meaning is still debated, suggesting that even today, we are only beginning to glimpse the complexity of the pharaoh's secret systems. Some of the most profound secrets are suggested by the presence of hidden chambers and unexcavated tombs. Archaeological evidence and historical records indicate that many pharaohs were buried in multiple tombs, or that decoy chambers were constructed to confuse thieves. Others were buried with objects and texts specifically designed to remain undiscovered until the appropriate time, preserving knowledge across centuries. Even today, modern imaging technologies occasionally reveal voids or anomalies within pyramids and tombs, hinting at chambers that may contain ritual artifacts, coded texts, or sacred instruments whose purpose has been lost to time. Each unexcavated chamber represents the potential to unlock centuries-old secrets, a direct connection to the pharaoh's strategies for safeguarding knowledge. The esoteric aspect of pharaonic secrecy extended to their understanding of the afterlife. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh's journey after death was not merely personal but cosmically significant. Texts like the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead encode instructions for navigating dangerous spiritual landscapes, confronting divine judges, and activating powers that ensured eternal life. These texts were deliberately fragmented, scattered, or hidden, with only initiates capable of fully interpreting them. The pharaohs, as living intermediaries, had access to the complete body of knowledge, ensuring that the kingdom's spiritual order remained aligned with the cosmic order. Ordinary mortals could participate in simpler versions of these rituals, but the full power of the esoteric instructions remained tightly controlled. Even monumental artworks were vehicles for concealed wisdom. The orientation, positioning, and symbolism of statues, reliefs, and murals were carefully designed to encode ritual, astronomical, and political information. A depiction of a pharaoh smiting an enemy was not merely propaganda. It could encode historical chronology, demonstrate divine approval, and convey instructions for protective rituals. The placement of statues within temple courtyards, the use of light and shadow, and the inclusion of symbolic objects created multiple layers of secrecy. Only those trained in the sacred sciences could fully interpret the messages embedded in these works, allowing the pharaoh to communicate selectively with the initiated while maintaining the illusion of omnipotence to the broader population. Moreover, secrecy was not static but adaptive. As foreign powers entered Egypt, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and later Romans, the pharaohs and their successors continued to protect core esoteric knowledge. Temples retained hidden archives, cults preserved secret rituals, and sacred texts were transmitted clandestinely. The methods of concealment evolved to incorporate new cultural and political realities, yet the underlying principle remained. Knowledge must be controlled, and access must be limited to preserve authority. Even when political power shifted, the legacy of secrecy endured, ensuring that the pharaohs' influence extended far beyond their mortal reigns. The combination of hidden mathematics, secret astronomical knowledge, encoded inscriptions, ritual artifacts, and concealed tomb chambers created a civilization in which nearly every aspect of life was intertwined with hidden layers of meaning. Power was exercised not only through armies, wealth, or diplomacy, but through control of perception, control of knowledge, and the careful orchestration of reality itself. Ordinary citizens might see the grandeur, witness the rituals, or marvel at the architecture, but the mechanisms underlying these spectacles were known only to the pharaoh and his initiated elite. Secrecy was both the foundation of authority and the lens through which the pharaoh maintained his divine image. At the heart of pharaonic secrecy was the manipulation of life and death itself. The pharaohs understood that their mortal end was not merely a private matter. It was a cosmic event with consequences for the entire kingdom. Their funerary rituals were therefore meticulously designed to control the transition from life to the afterlife, ensuring both continuity of divine authority and the protection of sacred knowledge. These rituals were often highly elaborate, spanning weeks or even months, and involved multiple layers of priestly participation, ceremonial objects, and esoteric incantations. Certain aspects of these ceremonies were performed in public, designed to impress and awe the population, while the most potent rites were conducted in hidden chambers, accessible only to the pharaoh and the highest-ranking priests. Central to these rituals was the concept of the Ka, Ba, and Ak, the components of the soul in Egyptian belief. The Ka represented the life force, the Ba the personality, and the Ak the form the soul took in the afterlife. The pharaoh's burial practices were carefully orchestrated to preserve and transform these aspects of the self. The precise placement of the body, the orientation of the tomb, and the inclusion of specific ritual objects were all intended to facilitate this transformation. Spells and instructions inscribed on tomb walls and papyri were not intended for casual reading. They were encoded in complex symbolic language designed to guide the pharaoh's soul while preventing misuse by the uninitiated. Any breach of this secrecy, it was believed, could imperil the king's eternal life, and by extension, the cosmic order itself. Some of the most cryptic aspects of pharaonic secrecy involved the use of hidden chambers within tombs and temples. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous examples of false doors, blocked passages, and concealed vaults, spaces designed not only to protect material wealth, but to house esoteric knowledge and magical instruments. In certain tombs, chambers were constructed to align with astronomical phenomena, allowing sunlight or starlight to activate sacred symbols at precise times of the year. These hidden interactions of light, architecture, and ritual were a sophisticated method of linking the pharaoh's earthly actions with cosmic forces. Ordinary observers could witness only the grandeur of the tombs and temples, while the deeper, functional layers remained invisible, accessible only to the initiated. The pharaoh's sacred texts further illustrate their obsession with concealment. The pyramid texts, coffin texts, and later the Book of the Dead were not merely guides to the afterlife. They were repositories of magical, astronomical, and philosophical knowledge. These texts were often fragmented, encoded, or deliberately obscured, ensuring that only those with the proper initiation could fully comprehend them. Within these writings lay instructions for navigating divine realms, confronting supernatural guardians, and invoking protective spells. They also contained symbolic representations of political power, showing how the pharaoh's mastery over cosmic forces reflected his earthly authority. Access to these texts was tightly controlled, and in many cases, they were placed in hidden or restricted chambers to prevent interference or exploitation by outsiders. Artifacts used in rituals were similarly enigmatic. Ceremonial knives, scepters, wands, and amulets were more than symbols. They were tools of power, imbued with divine and magical significance. Some were designed to channel protective energy, others to manipulate cosmic forces, and still others to serve as keys to hidden chambers or secret knowledge. These objects were often deliberately hidden, buried in secret caches, or inscribed with cryptic hieroglyphs that encoded instructions comprehensible only to the initiated. The concealment of these items served multiple purposes. It preserved their power, protected the pharaoh's authority, and ensured that sacred knowledge remained inaccessible to those who might misuse it. Secrecy also governed the pharaoh's manipulation of the natural world. Priests and the king himself were intimately familiar with celestial cycles, the inundation of the Nile, and seasonal agricultural patterns. This knowledge was partially practical, essential for survival, but it was also symbolic. By controlling the timing of festivals, rituals, and ceremonial activities in harmony with cosmic events, the pharaoh projected an image of divine authority that ordinary Egyptians could neither replicate nor fully understand. The appearance of harmony between human action and cosmic order reinforced the perception that the pharaoh's power extended beyond mere politics into the very fabric of reality. Even the pharaoh's personal conduct and inner lives were meticulously regulated to preserve secrecy. Succession, alliances, and court intrigues were carefully controlled. Missteps could be concealed, successes amplified, and rivals erased from memory. Female pharaohs, such as Hatshepsut, sometimes resorted to rewriting history, replacing their predecessors' names, or altering inscriptions to legitimize their reign. Akhenaten attempted radical religious reform and faced posthumous erasure. These manipulations show that secrecy was as much about controlling perception and memory as it was about concealing magical or ritual knowledge. The pharaoh's authority depended on the ability to shape reality itself, both during life and after death. Furthermore, the pharaoh's hidden knowledge extended into medicine, chemistry, and engineering. Embalming techniques, for instance, were highly sophisticated, preserving bodies for millennia. The combination of chemical treatments, precise anatomical knowledge, and ritual practices ensured that the pharaoh's body remained intact, which was considered essential for eternal life. Similarly, construction techniques for temples, pyramids, and monuments incorporated advanced understanding of materials, geometry, and physics. These practical applications were inseparable from the spiritual and symbolic. Mastery over life, death, and matter was itself a closely guarded secret of kingship. The pharaoh's strategies of concealment were adaptive. As Egypt faced foreign invasions and internal unrest, rituals, texts, and sacred objects were protected, relocated, or encoded in new ways. Hidden chambers were constructed, archives moved, and cult practices modified to preserve the continuity of authority. Even as political power shifted under Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, the essential structure of secrecy endured. The pharaoh's knowledge of divine, cosmic, and temporal forces remained a cornerstone of authority, maintained by secret priestly networks, hidden texts, and esoteric practices. The ultimate effect of this intricate system of secrecy was the creation of a civilization in which knowledge, power, and reality were tightly interwoven. The pharaohs did not merely rule through force or wealth. They ruled by controlling perception, by orchestrating rituals that linked the human and divine, by embedding knowledge in monuments, artifacts, and texts, and by preserving secrets across generations. Even today, modern archaeology has only begun to scratch the surface of these hidden layers. Every tomb, artifact, and inscription offers the potential to uncover fragments of knowledge that the pharaohs carefully guarded for eternity, hinting at a civilization whose mastery of secrecy was as profound as its monuments are awe-inspiring. Despite centuries of exploration, excavation, and scholarship, the sands of Egypt continue to conceal countless mysteries. Archaeologists have long speculated that beneath the shifting deserts, vast tombs and hidden chambers remain undiscovered, containing artifacts, texts, and ritual instruments that could dramatically expand our understanding of pharaonic life, spirituality, and authority. These unexcavated tombs were often deliberately camouflaged, designed to mislead potential intruders. False entrances, collapsed corridors, and deceptive layouts were standard architectural strategies, creating labyrinthine structures that concealed both material and esoteric treasures. Some tombs were designed to be discovered only at the right time, or by those with knowledge of specific secret markers, demonstrating that the pharaohs did not merely hide treasures. They orchestrated the very discovery process of their most important legacies. Undeciphered texts present another profound layer of pharaonic secrecy. While the vast majority of hieroglyphic inscriptions have been studied, translated, and interpreted, there remain fragments and entire texts whose meaning continues to elude scholars. Some are thought to contain ritual instructions or magical formulas intended to guide the pharaoh through the afterlife, or even to manipulate spiritual forces in ways that modern understanding cannot fully grasp. Others may encode historical knowledge, secret lineages, or cosmological observations deliberately obscured to prevent misuse. The very fact that these texts remain partially or wholly undeciphered reinforces the pharaoh's strategy. True power lies not only in the possession of knowledge but in the control of its accessibility. The texts that survive are fragments of a larger corpus of esoteric wisdom, hinting at practices, understandings, and strategies of concealment that may forever remain beyond our full comprehension. Cryptic ritual objects also played a central role in maintaining pharaonic secrecy. From ceremonial scepters and wands to intricately inscribed amulets and statuary, these objects were simultaneously functional, symbolic, and protective. Some were designed to channel magical energies, others to encode sacred knowledge, and still others to serve as keys or indicators for hidden chambers. In some cases, a single artifact could carry multiple layers of meaning. A scepter might convey political authority, align with celestial patterns, and serve as a conduit for magical protection all at once. The concealment of these objects was deliberate, ensuring that the pharaoh's power, spiritual, political, and symbolic, remained unchallengeable. Even today, the discovery of a single amulet or artifact can challenge centuries of understanding, suggesting that much of the pharaohs' hidden knowledge is still entombed beneath sand, stone, and secrecy. These hidden objects were often intimately tied to ritual practices, many of which remain partially or wholly unknown to modern scholars. Some rituals involve the precise manipulation of light and shadow, aligning statues, mirrors, or reflective surfaces to celestial events, activating symbolic energy at specific times. Others may have involved the preparation and use of sacred oils, incense, or compounds whose precise chemical or magical properties were lost over time. The pharaohs understood that power could be transmitted not only through public spectacle or material wealth, but through the careful orchestration of unseen forces. The full efficacy of these rituals depended on secrecy. Exposure could diminish their potency, or even endanger those performing them, reflecting a belief in a world governed by both visible and invisible laws. Hidden chambers also contained esoteric records, administrative, spiritual, and cosmological knowledge, encoded in ways designed to be inaccessible to all but the highest priests or the pharaoh himself. Architectural blueprints, ritual diagrams, and mathematical calculations were often inscribed within tombs and temples, not merely for practical use, but as symbolic expressions of cosmic and divine order. By embedding knowledge in stone and placing it behind concealed doors, the pharaohs ensured that critical information survived for future generations, while remaining insulated from misuse or profanation. Some chambers were deliberately misaligned or designed with decoys to deter thieves or rival factions, illustrating the extraordinary lengths to which the pharaohs went to protect both knowledge and authority. The pharaohs' obsession with secrecy extended even to their daily lives. Their movements, alliances, and personal relationships were carefully managed to prevent leaks of sensitive information. Court intrigue was omnipresent, yet much of it was deliberately erased from public record or framed in symbolic narratives that reinforced divine authority. Even intimate details of royal succession were protected, encoded in rituals, ceremonies, and inscriptions that only the initiated could understand. This control over perception ensured that the pharaoh remained a figure of awe, not merely politically, but cosmically, reinforcing the idea that the ruler's authority was rooted in divine order rather than mortal politics alone. Secrecy also intersected with the pharaohs' understanding of death in profound ways. The preparation of the body, the arrangement of the tomb, and the choice of funerary goods were all deeply symbolic, designed to preserve the pharaoh's spiritual essence while also encoding practical, magical, and cosmic knowledge. Mummification techniques, for instance, combined advanced chemical knowledge with ritual practice. Organs were preserved, resins applied, and wrappings arranged in precise patterns, all designed to maintain the integrity of the Ka and Ba, ensuring successful transformation into the act. The secrecy of these processes ensured that the pharaoh's afterlife remained secure, and by extension, that the kingdom's spiritual and cosmic stability was preserved. Hidden astronomical knowledge was another pillar of secrecy. The pharaohs were intimately aware of the movements of the stars, the sun, and the moon, and they integrated these observations into religious, agricultural, and political planning. Temples were constructed to interact with celestial light at specific moments, illuminating statues, inscriptions, or ritual spaces in ways that symbolically activated divine energy. Observatories, both known and concealed, may have existed to track these movements, but access was tightly restricted. Knowledge of celestial cycles was carefully guarded, as it reinforced the pharaoh's ability to claim control over both natural and spiritual forces, demonstrating that his authority extended beyond the terrestrial into the cosmic. Even the physical landscape of Egypt was manipulated to protect secrets. Certain sacred sites were chosen not only for symbolic significance, but for their concealment. Remote valleys, cliff faces, and desert plateaus provided natural barriers against intrusion. The selection of sites for tombs, temples, and hidden chambers took into account both spiritual significance and strategic secrecy, creating a civilization in which geography itself became a medium for concealed knowledge. Rivers, hills, and star alignments were orchestrated into a sacred landscape, readable only to those trained in the mysteries, while invisible to the casual observer. Ultimately, the pharaoh's secrets were multidimensional, operating across spiritual, political, architectural, and cosmic levels. Knowledge itself became a form of currency and power, carefully guarded through hidden texts, secret objects, encoded rituals, and concealed spaces. Ordinary people could marvel at temples, tombs, and monuments, but the deeper currents of control, the magical, the esoteric, the cosmic, remained inaccessible, forming the backbone of a civilization that thrived for millennia through the orchestration of secrecy. Even today, fragments of this hidden knowledge surface gradually, tantalizing historians and archaeologists, suggesting that countless secrets remain buried, waiting to reveal the full scope of the pharaohs' mastery over life, death, and eternity. Among the most elusive aspects of pharaonic secrecy were sacred relics, objects so imbued with divine significance and ritual power that their very existence was often concealed. These relics were not merely ceremonial. They were considered active conduits of cosmic and spiritual forces, capable of influencing both mortal and divine realms. Some relics were deliberately hidden within temples or tombs, accessible only through complex rituals or secret passageways, their locations often known to only the pharaoh and a few high priests. Other relics may have been destroyed or moved during periods of upheaval, their absence carefully recorded or mythologized to prevent knowledge of their true purpose from falling into the wrong hands. Certain relics were thought to carry protective power for the kingdom itself, linking the health, prosperity, and political stability of Egypt directly to the integrity of these secret objects. The symbolic systems employed by the pharaohs add yet another layer of intrigue. Hieroglyphs, the written language of Egypt, were far more than a means of communication. They were a multi-dimensional code capable of conveying layered meanings simultaneously. Beyond their phonetic and grammatical function, hieroglyphs encoded mathematical, astronomical, and magical knowledge. For example, a depiction of a simple figure could simultaneously reference a deity, a cosmic principle, and a ritual instruction. Certain hieroglyphic sequences appear to be deliberately obfuscated, reversed, mirrored, or abstracted to prevent casual interpretation. Only trained initiates, guided by ritual instruction and esoteric understanding, could access the deeper meanings embedded within these symbols. This ensured that sacred knowledge remained controlled, while the public saw only what was intended, an image of divine order and unassailable authority. The pharaohs also maintained complex networks of secrecy that extended across the kingdom, connecting temples, priestly institutions, and royal courts. These networks operated like hidden circuits of power, enabling the controlled transmission of knowledge while insulating it from misuse. Priests were trained in specialized areas: astronomy, ritual, architecture, magic, and administration, yet rarely received complete information, creating a system of interdependence in which only the pharaoh could coordinate the full scope of power. Messages, instructions, and ritual knowledge could be transmitted using coded inscriptions, symbolic gestures, or secret ceremonial protocols, ensuring that the kingdom's most critical knowledge could be mobilized effectively while remaining hidden from public view. The construction of sacred monuments also functioned as a repository of concealed knowledge. Pyramids, temples, and tomb complexes were not merely displays of grandeur. They were carefully engineered to encode information about cosmology, mathematics, ritual practice, and the pharaoh's relationship to the divine. The orientation of walls, the positioning of statues, and the alignment with celestial events created a landscape of secrecy that could be read only by those with the necessary ritual and mathematical expertise. Even the dimensions of architectural features, angles, ratios, and proportions, were symbolic, creating a geometric language that intertwined spiritual, temporal, and cosmic knowledge. These constructions were not just monuments, they were encrypted messages, lasting records of power and secret wisdom encoded in stone. Secret burial practices were among the most profound expressions of pharaonic concealment. Tombs were designed not only to protect material wealth, but to preserve the spiritual essence of the pharaoh. Hidden chambers, false doors, and concealed passageways safeguarded both the king's body and sacred objects. The placement of ritual texts, artifacts, and symbolic carvings within tombs created a multi-layered system that guided the pharaoh's soul through the afterlife. Only the highest priests or the pharaoh himself fully understood the sequence of rituals, the significance of each artifact, and the esoteric meaning of inscriptions. This system ensured that the pharaoh's power, even in death, remained secure and potent, reinforcing the perception of eternal authority. Some of the most tantalizing mysteries involve artifacts and texts that have never been fully excavated or deciphered. Archaeologists occasionally uncover fragments of papyri, stone inscriptions, or ritual objects whose purpose is unclear, suggesting the existence of knowledge deliberately concealed from history itself. These objects hint at practices, technologies, or spiritual understandings that may have been known only to a select few, lost deliberately to protect the pharaoh's supremacy. Certain tombs, long suspected to contain hidden chambers, remain unexcavated, offering the possibility of discoveries that could fundamentally alter our understanding of Egyptian ritual, politics, and spiritual life. Even beyond physical artifacts and architecture, secrecy was embedded in social structures. Knowledge was hierarchical, transmitted selectively, and reinforced through ritual, ceremony, and daily practice. Access to the full scope of information about astronomy, magic, governance, and spiritual rites was tightly controlled. Ordinary citizens participated in simplified versions of religious or civic rituals, perceiving only the outer layer of order and grandeur, while the inner mechanisms remained hidden. This selective access ensured obedience, reinforced divine authority, and maintained the pharaoh's central role in both spiritual and political realms. The pharaoh's use of secrecy also extended into memory itself. Certain rulers, like Hatshepsut and Akhenaten, manipulated historical records, erased predecessors, and rewrote inscriptions to control perception across generations. Knowledge of failed campaigns, political rivalries, or religious upheavals was carefully concealed, often replaced with narratives emphasizing divine favor and unbroken authority. By controlling what could be remembered and what could be forgotten, the pharaohs maintained the illusion of unassailable power. Memory, both collective and institutional, became a tool of concealment as powerful as tombs, relics, or coded texts. Ultimately, the pharaohs' obsession with secrecy encompassed every dimension of their civilization: life, death, governance, ritual, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and memory itself. Knowledge was power, and the ability to control that knowledge, to encode it, and to restrict access was the foundation of pharaonic authority. Temples, tombs, artifacts, and sacred texts were simultaneously functional, symbolic, and protective, creating a civilization in which the boundary between the visible and invisible, the known and hidden, was carefully maintained. Even today, the sands of Egypt guard countless secrets, suggesting that much of the pharaohs' mastery over life, death, and cosmic order remains waiting, buried, and unseen, challenging us to uncover truths that were intentionally obscured for millennia. The pharaohs' mastery over concealment was not merely about hiding objects or knowledge. It was a deliberate orchestration of perception, experience, and spiritual influence. Every aspect of life in ancient Egypt, from monumental architecture to quotidian ceremonial acts, was designed to communicate both visible authority and hidden potency. Temples were not only spaces of worship, they were coded landscapes of power. Walls, columns, and statuary carried multi-layered symbolism, referencing theological concepts, astronomical phenomena, and ritual processes that were intelligible only to those initiated in sacred sciences. Certain rooms or inner sanctums were deliberately isolated from public access, functioning as repositories of esoteric wisdom, where celestial alignments and geometric precision guided the execution of ceremonies with hidden efficacy. The interplay of material culture and spiritual practice further amplified the pharaohs' command over both seen and unseen realms. Ceremonial implements, ranging from gilded scepters to elaborately engraved ritual vessels, were crafted to serve practical functions in rites while simultaneously encoding layers of cosmological and metaphysical knowledge. Some items acted as conduits for protective forces. Others transmitted sacred energy to maintain harmony between the king, his court, and the surrounding world. These objects often carried inscriptions or motifs whose interpretation required detailed training in ritual logic, numerology, and celestial observation. As a result, the same artifact could convey multiple dimensions of meaning at once, depending on the practitioner's level of initiation, creating a system in which control of information equated directly to control of influence. Sacred geometry and numerology played central roles in reinforcing hidden authority. The precise measurements of pyramids, temples, and tombs were never arbitrary. They encoded philosophical principles, mathematical constants, and cosmological relationships. This knowledge was tightly held, often limited to the most trusted architects, priests, and the ruler himself. Through alignment with stars, planets, and solstices, structures became instruments for coordinating terrestrial and cosmic cycles. The pharaoh's connection to the heavens, demonstrated through such constructions, was both symbolic and operational, signaling that human and divine realms could be synchronized only under the king's stewardship. In this sense, architectural mastery became a form of ritualized secrecy, where knowledge of design equaled access to spiritual and political authority. Even the landscape itself functioned as a medium for concealed instruction. Nile floodplains, desert ridges, and valley formations were integrated into sacred layouts, guiding ceremonial routes, influencing agricultural cycles, and reinforcing symbolic hierarchies. Temples were positioned to capture sunlight or starlight in ways that activated hidden inscriptions or illuminated ritual statues at critical points in the solar or lunar cycle. Ordinary citizens might witness these moments as awe-inspiring events, without comprehending the intricate astronomical and ritual mechanics underlying them. This interplay of environment, construction, and timing demonstrates that the pharaohs' control over space, light, and cosmic rhythm was an intentional method of concealing the mechanisms of power while displaying its effects. The pharaohs' management of historical record constituted another dimension of secrecy. Inscriptions, reliefs, and chronicles were carefully curated to present idealized narratives. Failures, political discord, and religious upheavals were either erased, reframed, or symbolically encoded to align with divine imperatives. Such manipulation of memory ensured that public perception reinforced the continuity and legitimacy of kingship. Even when texts survived, they often contained ambiguous or multi-layered language, allowing selective interpretation. Through this combination of censorship and coded communication, the pharaohs shaped the collective memory of their civilization, ensuring that knowledge itself became a tool of governance and spiritual control. Burial practices exemplify the fusion of secrecy, ritual, and cosmic strategy. Tombs were constructed as intricate environments designed to safeguard the pharaoh's physical form and facilitate the soul's passage through the afterlife. Hidden chambers, labyrinthine corridors, and false entrances protected essential texts, artifacts, and ritual implements from intrusion. Beyond protection, these spaces were carefully oriented in relation to celestial bodies, with shafts and corridors aligned to key stars or solar events. Such precision ensured that ceremonial actions within the tomb activated intended cosmic and spiritual effects, guiding the pharaoh's transformation and sustaining divine favor. The integration of astronomy, architecture, and esoteric instruction in burial design illustrates the holistic and multi-layered nature of pharaonic secrecy. The transmission of sacred knowledge was equally strategic. Initiation into ritual, celestial, and magical sciences was highly selective. Apprentices learned only discrete portions of the system, creating interdependence and preventing full understanding by any single individual. Priests specialized in areas such as star charts, calendrical calculation, embalming rites, or the construction of symbolic objects. This compartmentalization ensured that the pharaoh retained ultimate authority over both information and practice, safeguarding his role as mediator between human and divine realms. Knowledge was simultaneously preserved, operationalized, and protected, reinforcing political, religious, and cosmic hierarchies. Even ordinary daily rituals concealed deeper significance. Acts such as offering libations, burning incense, or performing processions were layered with symbolic, astronomical, and magical meaning. What appeared as public religious observance often had hidden functions, aligning energies, activating protective symbols, or transmitting sacred power from the king to the wider environment. Such practices exemplified the pharaohs' ability to embed esoteric operations within visible frameworks, allowing both public spectacle and private efficacy to coexist seamlessly. In this sense, secrecy was not merely the withholding of knowledge. It was the integration of layered systems in which surface appearances masked profound, unseen mechanisms. Ultimately, the pharaohs' civilization functioned as a sophisticated network of concealment, spanning artifacts, architecture, rituals, texts, celestial alignments, and memory itself. Power was exercised as much through hidden knowledge and strategic perception as through armies, wealth, or political edicts. Each layer reinforced the others. Sacred objects encoded knowledge, texts guided ritual practice. Architecture aligned with cosmic cycles, and memory management ensured continuity. The result was a society in which control of information equated directly to control of reality, a civilization in which the pharaoh's authority was both materially present and metaphysically reinforced, experienced in every act, every monument, and every ceremony. Beyond the visible grandeur of temples and pyramids, the pharaohs may have possessed knowledge of techniques and technologies that modern science only partially understands. Some scholars speculate that certain architectural achievements, particularly the precise cutting, transport, and placement of massive stones, could have involved methods deliberately concealed, perhaps even treated as sacred secrets. The alignment of monuments with specific stars, the use of exact geometric ratios, and the creation of acoustically resonant chambers hint at an understanding of physics and astronomy that was far more advanced than previously assumed. The pharaohs guarded these methods jealously, passing knowledge only to trusted priests or engineers, ensuring that the power to manipulate the material and cosmic world remained tightly controlled. Ordinary citizens could admire the monument's perfection without ever grasping the techniques, reinforcing the aura of divine authority surrounding the king. There is also evidence suggesting that certain rituals may have been far more complex and potentially more powerful than conventional interpretations allow. Some ceremonial spaces, particularly in hidden chambers, were designed to amplify sound or vibration. Acoustics could have been used to activate symbolic inscriptions or channel energy during rites. This implies that the pharaohs and their initiates may have believed in, or even experienced, the tangible effects of spiritual resonance, a principle that linked sound, sacred geometry, and ritual power in ways still largely mysterious to modern observers. These hidden chambers, intentionally isolated and obscured, may have been the laboratories of sacred knowledge, where spiritual, scientific, and political influence were concentrated in ways that blurred the boundaries between magic and practical engineering. Lost libraries and archives may have contained some of the most guarded secrets of all. While we have discovered fragments of papyri, stelae, and hieroglyphic inscriptions, historians believe that vast repositories of knowledge, possibly including detailed astronomical records, advanced medical recipes, and codified ritual procedures, were deliberately hidden or destroyed. These libraries, protected by labyrinthine passageways and hidden chambers, may have preserved esoteric wisdom accessible only to the pharaoh and his inner circle. If fully recovered, such knowledge could rewrite our understanding of ancient Egyptian science, religion, and governance. Even the fragments we have today suggest an incredibly sophisticated culture, capable of merging spiritual, mathematical, and cosmic principles into practical and ritual systems. The pharaohs' mastery of secrecy extended into areas of life that modern society might not immediately consider: perception, psychology, and influence over belief itself. Through ceremonies, public spectacles, and carefully constructed narratives, the pharaohs shaped what their people saw, heard, and believed. Festivals, processions, and temple rituals were choreographed to convey not just power but inevitability. The idea that cosmic order, earthly stability, and divine favor were inseparable from the king's presence. Simultaneously, hidden rituals ensured that only the initiated could truly access the forces underlying these events. Knowledge of this hidden mechanism created a dual reality, one experienced by the general populace and one known only to the elite, reinforcing control in subtle, invisible ways. Some of the most tantalizing secrets relate to unexplored or only partially explored tombs and monuments. Researchers have detected voids within the Great Pyramid, hidden passages in mortuary complexes, and anomalies in desert sites that may indicate undiscovered chambers. These spaces could house ritual objects, coded texts, or relics of spiritual significance designed to preserve and transmit knowledge across centuries. The potential of such discoveries fuels speculation about the pharaohs' true capabilities, raising questions about whether some aspects of their authority, spiritual, technological, or otherwise, were never intended for the world to see. Their secrets, it seems, were layered so deliberately that even millennia of human curiosity have only begun to pierce their veil. Moreover, some pharaohs may have intentionally left symbolic markers across the landscape, connecting temples, pyramids, and tombs in patterns corresponding to constellations or celestial alignments. These markers function both as spiritual guides and as practical systems of encoded information. By studying them, priests or initiates could determine the timing of rituals, the best periods for agricultural cycles, or the alignment of ceremonial objects, all while keeping these systems hidden from ordinary observers. The pharaohs' genius lay in embedding complex systems of knowledge within the natural and constructed world, allowing power to manifest invisibly while appearing entirely ordained by divine forces. Finally, there is evidence to suggest that some secrets may have been designed to influence the very fabric of reality as the Egyptians understood it. Rituals involving sacred geometry, cosmic timing, magical inscriptions, and consecrated objects were believed to maintain harmony between the material and spiritual worlds. Mistakes or unauthorized access could have catastrophic consequences according to their cosmology, emphasizing the importance of secrecy. By safeguarding knowledge, controlling access, and designing elaborate multi-layered systems, the pharaohs ensured that their authority extended from the temporal world to eternity itself. The civilization they built was, in essence, a carefully orchestrated symphony of seen and unseen forces, in which every stone, word, and ritual contributed to the concealment of ultimate power. The pharaohs' mastery of concealment was as much about perception as it was about objects or texts. Their rituals were crafted to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Public ceremonies impressed the masses with grandeur, precision, and apparent divine favor, while hidden dimensions of the same ceremonies activated forces understood only by the initiates. Consider the ritual of the Est Festival, ostensibly a celebration of the king's renewal. To the public, it displayed strength, continuity, and cosmic alignment. Yet within the inner sanctums, priests performed intricate rites involving astronomical calculations, symbolic gestures, and carefully placed sacred objects that reinforced the king's spiritual authority and channeled protective energies for both ruler and kingdom. The combination of spectacle and secrecy exemplifies how the pharaohs' power was encoded not just in what was seen, but in the carefully hidden mechanics behind the scenes. Hidden codes within hieroglyphs, monuments, and temple layouts suggest a level of intellectual sophistication that modern researchers are still struggling to fully decode. Some inscriptions appear deliberately ambiguous, combining phonetic, symbolic, and mathematical layers. A single hieroglyph might convey theological meaning, denote cosmic relationships, and function as a ritual instruction all at once. Temples like Karnak or Luxor, with their labyrinthine hypostyle halls, column inscriptions, and celestial alignments, appear designed not only for devotion, but also as living encyclopedias of sacred knowledge. Initiates could read the temple like a manuscript, accessing instructions for rituals, symbolic maps of cosmology, and guidance for governing the kingdom, while casual observers experienced only awe and reverence. In this way, architecture, text, and ritual were integrated into a system of encoded power, ensuring that the pharaoh's authority was both public and profoundly hidden. Some of the most tantalizing speculation surrounds lost sciences and knowledge that the pharaohs may have understood and deliberately preserved for an inner circle. Advanced understanding of astronomy, hydraulics, chemistry, and metallurgy has been inferred from their constructions and artifacts. The precise alignment of pyramids to the stars, the ability to transport and position massive stones with incredible accuracy, and the sophisticated embalming techniques that preserved human tissue for millennia all suggest technical knowledge that was both practical and ritualized. By restricting access to these methods, the pharaohs could ensure that no rival or foreign power could replicate or challenge their authority. The combination of spiritual, technical, and mathematical mastery created a system in which concealment itself was a form of governance. Rituals involving sound, light, and resonance further illustrate the depth of secrecy. Certain chambers in temples and tombs appear designed to create acoustic effects, amplifying chants, vibrations, or instrumental sounds. Light shafts aligned with solstices or particular stars could illuminate inscriptions or statues in ways visible only at specific times, activating symbolic energies in accordance with spiritual principles. The pharaohs and their priests likely understood these effects, incorporating them into rituals that reinforced cosmic order and spiritual power. The ordinary population could witness the spectacle, but the underlying mechanisms, sound resonance, optical alignments, and the precise timing of ritual actions remained entirely hidden, creating a dual experience of reality that blended perception, symbolism, and controlled secrecy. Even funerary practices, long studied by historians, hold secrets that remain elusive. Tombs such as those in the Valley of the Kings were not merely repositories of wealth or burial chambers. They were complex environments designed for both protection and transformation. Hidden passages, secret vaults, and encoded inscriptions were intended to safeguard the king's spiritual journey. Artifacts placed within these chambers were often inscribed with magical formulas or symbolic motifs whose full function remains unknown. Some scholars speculate that certain objects could have been used to manipulate metaphysical forces, channel cosmic energy, or even facilitate communication between the living and the divine. The pharaoh's death, therefore, was carefully orchestrated to reinforce control over life, afterlife, and the kingdom itself, making secrecy a fundamental instrument of power. Moreover, the pharaohs' concealment strategies extended into mapping and landscape design. Temples, tombs, and ceremonial spaces were positioned with astronomical and geographical precision. Hidden markers and alignments allowed priests to coordinate rituals, track celestial events, and manage agricultural cycles, all while remaining invisible to the uninitiated. This integrated system of environmental, spiritual, and political intelligence ensured that power flowed along controlled lines, with knowledge as the central pillar. Even subtle variations in orientation or design could signal ritual instructions or encode information, suggesting that the landscape itself functioned as a living archive of secret knowledge. Finally, the pharaohs' obsession with secrecy seems to have included a profound understanding of human psychology. By controlling what could be seen, understood, or remembered, they maintained influence not only through divine symbolism, but also through carefully managed perception. Public displays, monumental architecture, ritualized ceremony, and symbolic inscriptions created a reality in which obedience, reverence, and awe became reflexive. Knowledge of the inner workings, the celestial mathematics, ritual manipulations, and encoded wisdom was confined to a few, while the majority experienced only the intended impression. The pharaoh's power was absolute, eternal, and ordained by cosmic forces. In essence, the pharaohs engineered a civilization in which secrecy was the primary medium of power. Knowledge, ritual, architecture, astronomy, and memory were interwoven into a system that simultaneously impressed, guided, and concealed. The ordinary population observed splendor and ritual, unaware that every stone, gesture, and inscription was part of an encrypted network designed to maintain control over life, death, and cosmic order. Even today, countless tombs, chambers, and texts remain undiscovered, hinting at knowledge and practices that may forever remain elusive, yet testify to the extraordinary sophistication and intentional secrecy of the pharaohs' civilization. One of the lesser-known dimensions of pharaonic secrecy lay in their knowledge of the human body and medicine, knowledge that may have been tightly guarded within priestly circles. Ancient Egyptian physicians were not merely healers. They were custodians of esoteric wisdom that blended spiritual and practical understanding. Papyrus texts like the Ebers Papyrus hint at advanced surgical techniques, complex pharmaceutical compounds, and the use of specific minerals or plant extracts to manipulate the body in ways that were ritualized as much as they were medicinal. Some remedies may have been kept secret, passed only to the royal family or high priests. It is believed that certain treatments were considered sacred, their formulas hidden because of their perceived potency or potential danger. Healing and harm were closely intertwined in Egyptian philosophy, and the pharaoh, as both spiritual and political leader, could command access to life-giving or lethal knowledge in ways that reinforced authority. Linked to this is the possibility that the pharaohs possessed knowledge of poisons and chemical substances that were considered forbidden for the general populace. Certain ritual texts hint at substances capable of altering consciousness or life force, and while many of these formulas have been lost, it is plausible that the most dangerous knowledge, used for protection, assassination, or control, was carefully guarded. These substances could have been encoded in symbolic language, hidden recipes, or even within the ceremonial use of plants and minerals. The combination of ritual and chemistry allowed the pharaohs to integrate science, magic, and authority, creating a system in which knowledge of life and death was central to power. Another remarkable aspect of pharaonic secrecy was the ritualization of music, sound, and vibration. Musical instruments, chants, and rhythmic movements were not merely for entertainment or public worship. They were part of a system designed to manipulate spiritual energy and consciousness. Certain temple chambers and tombs appear to have been engineered with acoustics in mind, amplifying chants, the resonance of drums, or the vibrations of metal and stone objects to produce effects that could alter perception or activate symbolic energy. Initiates would understand the timing, tone, and sequence of these sonic rituals, whereas ordinary worshippers would simply experience awe. Sound became a tool for maintaining secrecy. It transmitted hidden knowledge in a non-writ, non-visible medium, accessible only through initiation. Mathematics and geometry, long associated with architecture, also had esoteric applications that were deliberately concealed. Beyond constructing pyramids or aligning temples with stars, numerology may have been used in rituals to manipulate time, cycles, and spiritual forces. Certain numbers and proportions were considered sacred, believed to carry intrinsic energy or resonance. Initiates may have used these calculations to schedule ceremonies, activate symbolic devices, or determine the precise placement of ritual objects. Even the measurement of land, grain, and water may have carried encoded meanings, reflecting an understanding of the natural and supernatural worlds that blurred the line between administration, spirituality, and magical influence. The pharaohs may also have experimented with human perception and consciousness. Some rituals suggest methods designed to induce altered states, visions, or heightened awareness. These could have involved fasting, sensory deprivation, chanting, incense, or chemical aids, producing experiences interpreted as contact with the divine. The secrets of these practices were jealously guarded. Only initiates were permitted to engage in the full rituals, ensuring that access to altered perception and mystical insight was limited to those capable of wielding it responsibly. By controlling who could experience these states, the pharaohs ensured that spiritual authority remained centralized. Even the pharaohs' understanding of natural phenomena was likely infused with secrecy. Flooding cycles of the Nile, seasonal migrations, and celestial events were not merely observed for agriculture. They were incorporated into complex ritual frameworks. Predictions of natural events may have been encoded in temple inscriptions or priestly records, ensuring that the pharaoh could present himself as a mediator between the forces of nature and the people. By maintaining exclusive knowledge of these cycles, the king could appear omniscient, demonstrating control over what the general population could only witness as miraculous or predetermined. Finally, there is the enigmatic dimension of personal immortality. Beyond physical mummification, some pharaohs may have pursued spiritual techniques designed to preserve consciousness or memory in ways that transcended death. The careful arrangement of texts, objects, and sacred spaces suggests an elaborate strategy for extending influence into eternity, ensuring that hidden knowledge remained active and potent long after the mortal body had decayed. In this sense, secrecy was both practical and metaphysical. By controlling access to the pharaoh's knowledge, the living and the dead were bound within a system designed to perpetuate divine kingship indefinitely. These layers, secret medicine, controlled poisons, sound and vibration, sacred mathematics, altered consciousness, predictive knowledge of nature, and spiritual immortality, reveal a civilization in which secrecy was a science, a ritual, and a governance strategy simultaneously. The pharaoh's power was not simply political or architectural. It was an entire framework of hidden systems, each reinforcing the other, each designed to maintain authority, control knowledge, and obscure the mechanisms of reality from all but the few. The pharaoh's secrets were not merely superficial. They were deeply woven into every aspect of life, death, and the universe as they understood it. Mathematics, geometry, and astronomy were not just tools. They were sacred languages. They allowed the pharaohs and their priests to synchronize earthly and cosmic events, ensuring that temples, pyramids, and rituals aligned perfectly with celestial movements. Every stone placed in the pyramids, every temple column carved with hieroglyphs, and every statue positioned within sacred precincts carried layers of meaning. These layers were accessible only to those initiated in the esoteric knowledge of the royal court, while ordinary citizens were left to marvel at the spectacle, reinforcing the perception of divine authority. Hidden texts and sacred relics were central to maintaining power. From the pyramid texts to the coffin texts and beyond, these writings contained guidance for navigating the afterlife, invoking divine protection, and sustaining the king's authority. They were encoded, fragmented, and carefully concealed to prevent misuse, ensuring that knowledge of life, death, and spiritual transformation remained under strict control. Sacred objects, scepters, amulets, ceremonial knives, and ritual vessels were similarly imbued with power, often hidden in secret chambers, coded with inscriptions that guided only the initiated in the correct performance of rites. These artifacts were not decorative. They were active instruments in a network of spiritual and political influence that extended across the kingdom, and in the pharaoh's conception, into eternity itself. Beyond physical and textual secrets, the pharaohs mastered elements of human perception, consciousness, and even medicine. Rituals may have incorporated vibration, resonance, and acoustics to channel spiritual energy or enhance mystical experience. Initiates may have learned how to manipulate altered states of consciousness, harness sacred mathematics, and apply chemical and herbal knowledge to both heal and protect the body. The boundaries between science, magic, and ritual were fluid, with knowledge carefully restricted to the inner circle of priests and rulers. Even the pharaohs' understanding of natural cycles, Nile floods, seasonal changes, and celestial movements was a closely guarded secret, allowing the king to appear omniscient, omnipotent, and divine in the eyes of his subjects. Secrecy also permeated memory, history, and storytelling. The pharaohs rewrote narratives, erased predecessors, and controlled the historical record to shape perception. They ensured that failures, rivalries, or controversial acts were obscured, while their victories and divine favor were immortalized in monuments and inscriptions. By controlling what could be seen, remembered, and understood, they maintained authority in a society where knowledge was the ultimate form of power. Even death did not diminish this influence. The pharaohs' tombs, texts, and sacred relics were meticulously prepared to extend authority into the afterlife, guiding the king's soul and preserving divine order indefinitely. In the end, the pharaohs' secrets were not merely about objects, texts, or monuments. They were about control over perception, over reality, and over eternity itself. Life, death, nature, and the cosmos were all carefully interwoven into a system where hidden knowledge reinforced visible authority. It was a civilization built not only on awe-inspiring architecture and artistic achievement, but on the deliberate orchestration of mystery, the careful concealment of understanding, and the transmission of sacred wisdom to a chosen few. Even today, unexcavated tombs, undeciphered inscriptions, and buried artifacts suggest that many of these secrets remain hidden, waiting beneath the sands to challenge our understanding of ancient power and ingenuity. As we reflect on all these incredible dimensions, the secret knowledge of life, death, ritual, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and the very manipulation of perception, it becomes clear that the pharaoh civilization was far more sophisticated, deliberate, and secretive than we often imagine. They did not merely build monuments. They engineered a universe in which authority, knowledge, and spiritual power were intertwined, layered, and carefully protected. And perhaps the greatest secret of all is the enduring mystery itself, the sense that even after thousands of years, there is still more to discover, more to understand, and more to marvel at. Thank you so much for watching and joining me on this extraordinary journey through the hidden world of the pharaohs. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, your support really helps. So please make sure to subscribe or follow for more long history videos like this one. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us continue exploring the mysteries of the past and bringing these stories to life. The secrets of the pharaohs are waiting beneath the sands, and together, we can continue to uncover them piece by piece. So stay curious, stay fascinated, and I'll see you in the next exploration of history's greatest enigmas.